One of the biggest problems that we ambitious, competent men have is the need to distinguish ourselves from the average man, the need to prove to others that we are not average, and we tell ourselves, like, you know, well, why the fuck would I want to be like the average man? Why would I want to be like everybody else? And it's not wrong to want to distinguish ourselves. We are all different and unique in our own ways. We all have our own nuances and gifts that the Lord only gave us, right? But this need to prove ourselves, if we're really as competent as, you know, as we say we are, why is there this need to prove that we are not like the average man? And this will show up in our speech, the way we talk. It'll show up in our behaviors, obviously. The need to outdo everybody else, the feeling of pride and comparing ourselves to others, which holds us back. If you have the tendency of feeling like, I need to do it my way, or it's no way, my way or the fucking highway. That usually comes from your hubris, trying to protect your image, because you needing help from others makes you feel less than, makes you feel as like you're not as competent as you think you are, and that makes you closer to the average man who's not afraid to ask for help most times. And since we're competent, we believe our own hype. We block our own blessings because we get in our own way. We have the power to be better, but we find ourselves in predicaments where we know better and yet don't do better. So where's really like the disconnect? What is really going on? Your need to prove yourself blocks you from expressing yourself. It blocks you from expressing who you truly are. And it puts you in a performative state to always be outdoing the other man. It puts you in a state of comparison, feeling envious. Why does he have what I want? Yeah, I already got all this. I've already done the work, but he has what I want. Puts you in a state of envy, And there's nothing that dries the bones more than envy. When you're living in that comparative state, knowing that you're competent, but you're constantly looking at the next man's accomplishments, looking at the next man's gifts instead of your own, you'll find yourself emulating that other man, what scripture calls emulations. And you'll put these barriers, these mental barriers on yourselves, and really spiritual curse on yourself. Because once you're in the state of envy, you tend to become very performative, tend to become someone who is always looking to outdo other people for the same reason of trying to prove you're not average. And the more you sit with that fear and really like dig into it, like, why do I feel the need to really distinguish myself? Like, if I'm really not average, like, it would show, you know what I mean? It would show in who I am. But the need and that proof needing to prove yourself that you're not average. It really goes to show you that there's somewhere deeper inside of you that does believe he is indeed average. He is afraid to actually be forgotten. Is afraid to, like the average man, not live up to his potential. But see, it'd be even worse for you, because if you don't live up to your potential and you stay the average man, that's just self-betrayal to you. It'd be self-betrayal, knowing that you didn't do everything that you say you would do. That's even worse, because you have the awareness, you have the knowledge. It's not like you're dumb. And this constant conflict within yourself, this constant tension of having to perform so you're not seen like everyone else. What's the point? What's the point? What's the point of walking around with that that feeling on your shoulders, and that chip on your shoulder, you know, the need to isolate yourself from others because you don't want to be like them or feel like them, which is what some men end up doing. I want to be like everybody else, so they decide to completely isolate themselves. And what happens when they're put in in these different settings socially, to lead interactions, they can't show up as who they want to be because they haven't put in the time to actually cultivate themselves as men. Sure, they're uber disciplined, could be uber disciplined, very competent, have all the structure and routine, but if you do not express yourself, it doesn't mean shit, to be honest with you. Anybody could be disciplined, isolated. Anybody could hold a standard while isolated. It makes it easier. But you're really put to the test as a man when you have to stand up for what you believe in with conviction, you know. Stand up for yourself with conviction. Because you could do it and hesitate and be afraid, and it's not like gonna be respected. But if you're able to do it with conviction, people will trust you, people will respect you, right? Really, like, I know I had tended to find myself in that situation a lot, like feeling the need to outrun the average man, outrun that label of being the average man, you know. And it wasn't until I was around 16, 17 that I intrinsically understood I will never be like the average man. Not even because of like what I had, which is where a lot of us try to distinguish ourselves. We try to distinguish ourselves by our material items, you know, or with our accomplishments. But then, like I said, it leaves you in a state of envy, because you're always comparing of how much more work you're doing than everybody else, how much more followers you have than everybody else, how much more money you have than everybody else. And then you live your life like, honestly, like a woman. Like, good, straight up, that's how they live. They go on social media. Yeah, you guys ever happen like have it happen to you? Your girl's like, oh, why can't you be like this couple? Why can't we be like this couple? So you really have to like self audit yourself. Why do you really feel the need to distinguish yourself unless you really don't feel like you're that different from the average man? Unless you feel like a fraud. The feeling like a fraud, that really comes from you're not the same man when you're alone and when you're with others. You betray your own word constantly, and you create the confusion in yourself. So when you're around other people, there's this need to prove to them that you are who you say you are, instead of being the same man in each room. And that's something that I did have when I was younger. Like, I always had the work ethic and the output, but I would compare myself to other peers that age, because it's like I would work harder and they would be in positions that I wanted to be in, have things that I wanted to. And the day like I finally let go of that, and I was like, you know what, like, what's really the point of that? Like, what, like, if I'm really like as competent and different than I say I am, why the fuck would I need to prove it to them? Like, I prove it to myself, because I know, like, I have gifts that nobody else does. I'm sure they have gifts that I don't have, and that's perfectly fine. But what I would find myself is feeling the need to explain to people what I do, so that way I could distinguish myself, explain to people my mind. And that shit is so fucking draining. It's so exhausting. Like, to have to be explaining yourself all the time and trying to prove that you're different. People will know you're different by the way you carry yourself, by the, by your presence, by your energy. If you're really different, you wouldn't need anything physical in the world to distinguish how different you are. Unless you feel like material items validate you, validate the man you are. And if that's the case, you have to really audit yourself. Because when that shit comes, and when it gets taken away from you, because it will get taken away from you, you're going to lose all sense of self. Number two, we distinguish ourselves with the men that we are, with how we carry ourselves. So if you feel the need to, like, have results and accomplishments and success to really feel different, I mean, again, you're still chasing validation from other people. Because something that great men have is self belief, self definition, self validation. They define themselves, they validate themselves, self recognition. They believe in themselves, they recognize their own greatness. And when you do this, I don't give a fuck what the other person think. You know what I mean? Like, you just stop giving a fuck, low key, because it's like, I think en contrario, you actually find yourself wanting to help people more, because you have these gifts that you could share with other people. And that's when really, like, you start to express the man that you are rather than perform. You'll find yourself feeling, less of a fraud, because now you're showing up the same everywhere. No. So you're not really the average man, but you chasing that distinction from the average man is exactly what's going to keep you in that average state of mind.